The following program was provided by an independent producer solely responsible for its content. The opinions expressed do not necessarily represent the views of this station, its staff, board of directors, or underwriters.
Hello and welcome to The People's View. My name is David Schoenem and I'll be hosting this program, standing once again in for Carl Seidel, who's a normal host here. Thank you very much, Carl, for the opportunity. On The People's View, we take a look at primarily state and local political issues. We take a look at them from a conservative constitutional point of view. We're very concerned about following rule of law and being fiscally responsible. Well, last week in Nashua, we had a very important municipal election to decide the new Board of Aldermen, Board of Ed, Board of Public Works, and of course, mayoral race was unchallenged, but we had a mayoral candidate on the ballot as well. So we're going to talk a little bit today about the results of that election and the implications for you, the taxpayer at home. And with me in the studio today are two folks who were on the ballot last week, and I want to hear their perspective on their experience and what they see for the future of the city. Welcome, both of you, for coming in. Please introduce yourselves.
Hi, I'm Doris Owensy. I'm on the Board of Education till the end of this year.
Okay, welcome.
And Kevin Scully, former state rep, living in Ward 6, Nashua, an alderman candidate.
Thank you very much for coming in. I supported both of you in this election. I'm very sorry to say that you didn't make it. It's a challenging environment politically now. I think there's a lot of influences from national politics that seem to bleed over into local politics. And I'm astounded at sometimes when I see voters really, in my mind, voting against their own best interest on the local level, trying to send a message to Washington that, frankly, no one is hearing. Anyway, let's talk a little bit about what happened last week. Let's start with voter turnout. Now, Kevin, you have some numbers or a sense of what happened?
Yeah, I do, if you don't mind me reaching into my pocket and pulling out a paper. And first, before I start, thank you to the voters of Ward 6 who voted for me. Thank you for the people who put out my signs. I'm very grateful to the support that you gave me. I came in second in a race of 3. So I don't want to make this sound like I'm grousing too much. There was an awful lot of people who I think wanted me to represent their interests. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, we came up a little short. The turnout citywide was about 17.7%.
A total of how many ballots cast citywide?
About a total of 10,250. In my particular ward, Ward 6, we had a 16.4% turnout. So the turnout was very suppressed. And, well, at the end of the day, you want an informed voter, a motivated voter to come down and cast their ballots.
Right.
I was a little disappointed personally, and also from my perspective for the city, because we had 7 aldermanic candidates who basically ran on the platform of trying to enforce at least the spirit of the spending cap that we had, and none of them were elected.
That's very shocking to me too, because this is what I mean when I say voting against their own self-interest. We should have a healthy self-interest that would require that we look at who's going to represent us in these various bodies and how are they going to spend our money, because governments don't make any money. They take money and they take our money. And we've seen what's happened with tax rate here in Nashua. It goes up steadily. Sometimes folks talk about we have stable taxes. Well, our tax rate is not stable. The only thing that's stable is the growth. There's constant growth and really no growth in services. So we have a constantly growing tax rate, constantly growing tax bill. And that's not stable in my mind. They call that stable, but stable would mean it stays the same.
Right.
To me, here stable means, and Nashua stable means it's constantly growing at a consistent rate. I don't think that's good for taxpayers. And here we had 7 candidates, you said, who ran on a platform of fiscal responsibility, reining in some of this excessive spending. Taxes and spending has hurt a lot of folks in Nashua recently, particularly with the revaluation. A lot of folks who are in middle income, modest homes, saw huge increases. And These folks are the ones who I would hope would have voted for folks like you, Kevin.
Well, it's interesting. I honestly think that people have lived for so long with the benefit of the spending cap. They really don't yet it hasn't connected to them what it's going to be like with it not being there. And unfortunately, I think we're going to find out very, very quickly. Even in this current budget, which for the most part was, I think, still developed when people thought that the spending cap might still be put in place, they have something called the cities and towns have something called an inflation price deflator. It's the equivalent of the consumer price index, and we had been using. I think you know this, the 3-year average of the inflation price deflator, and that was our spending cap. We could not go above that, and because we had that restriction in place, it forced people to prioritize. They simply couldn't say, let's open up the checkbook and do everything at once at the same time. So had the inflation price deflator been honored, the increase in our taxes would have been about 2.25%. Now, the taxes went up 2.6%, so they had exceeded it, but it's worse than that number because what they did was they took one-time money from the state, $2.9 million, applied it to keep the tax rate down this year, but they spent the money. And when that one-time money is gone, you're going to see that increase next year, even if they didn't spend another dime.
Yeah, it's clear that the money comes from nowhere but from the taxpayers. And while we had the tax cap, or the spending cap rather, in place for all those years, there was still some manipulation that went on. I was on the board and I voted against the sewer fund manipulation. And if there had been no spending cap at that time, one proposed budget would have been about $3 million increase. And instead, it was about a $10 million increase. So by manipulating the cap, the mayor was able to claim, well, we stayed below the cap. But in fact, if you take that calculation out now retroactively, you can see that we didn't just increase it by $3 million. We increased it by about $10 million. And that extra $7 million has to come from somewhere.
Yes.
In the form of taxes and fees. And it's going to come from the folks who are hopefully watching the show and are thinking about the implication of elections on their household finances.
Right. So when they said our taxes went up 2.6%, I think they were actually closer to 3.4%. And if you look at the compounding effect of even 1.2% over what it should be over 10 years, if you're paying $5,000 in property taxes, at the end of that 10-year period, if you're actually going up a 1.2% more than our spending cap, you'll be spending $800 a year.
$8,000 a year.
No, more.
$800 more
per year, every single year going forward than you would if the spending cap was in place. So instead of it being, say, like $5,800, you're going to be up around $6,600 on your $5,000 tax rate.
And meanwhile, since the actual tax rate is going up, or taxes, the tax bill, because it's the rate times the valuation.
Yes.
So someone's going to say, well, our rate went down. Well, that's true, but our values went up more, and so the tax bill is higher. We're going to find that the taxes that we pay, the percentage increase in our taxes that is paid, exceeds any cost of living adjustment or inflationary factor that's existing in the United States at this time.
Yes, absolutely.
So it gets worse and worse.
Right. So people, play games with numbers, but at the end of the day, it comes down to spending. What is the rate of increase of spending? And that's what you have to try to keep under control. And I think we're starting to see the effects of that right now. Already they're talking about a new public works building.
Yeah,
we're still talking about the entertainment center. Now we're talking about the schools. Mm-hmm. Oh my God.
Let's talk a little bit about some of the spending. I want to get to the school board too. The school board, I saw in the union leader the other day, the Joint Special School Building Committee, I served on that committee when I was on the board of aldermen, has approved unanimously a $120 million project, roughly, to address middle school issues. It's going to involve some new construction, some renovation. I know there are a lot of factors on it, and the school board hasn't fully approved that yet. It would still have to go to the Board of Aldermen, but $120 million, that's quite a big chunk of money.
Quite a bit of money.
Do you serve on that Joint Special School Building Committee?
No, I don't.
No, okay.
No.
But you're on the school board. And so on the school board did not vote to support the 120.
We didn't vote on the composite project. We voted on the Elm Street portion of the project, not Pennachuck, not Fairgrounds, not the special ed component. So they immediately went to the JSSBC and said, we voted for the whole thing. wasn't the case. I'm waiting for the minutes to come out.
What's interesting, though, is that Joint Special School Building Committee has some aldermen on it, too, whereas a school board is just a school board. So Joint Special, it's some school board members, some Board of Aldermen members. And I would say, based on what you've told me, where the school board said we're going to do about 60 or so, once you got the aldermen involved, they said we're going to go to 120.
Right. They doubled
And so
it.
I think as soon as that gets to the Board of Aldermen, there's going to be probably unanimous approval for that bond. At the same time, my wife, Shannon, got elected to the Board of Public Works.
Yay.
I'm very glad to have her on there, too. So that's one conservative who seems to have made it somewhere in the city. There are one or two others, but anyway. She attended a meeting the other night, and she's not on that board yet, but she attended one of their meetings. And there's a plan now to bond $10 million to build a new building down at the landfill area.
Right.
This building, by the way, is not going to address all the issues that Public Works seems to have. If they were to address all those issues, it would be much more. So it's going to address some small cross-section of important issues, and it's $10 million. It looks to me, and I think it looks to Shannon, like they're just anxious to spend this money. And I shared before the show started that when I was on the Board of Aldermen, it was clear that, we were bonding a lot, but we're paying off. The city of Nashua pays off its debt pretty aggressively. And so there's a bonding level. We bond up to this amount. Then as those bonds are paid off and our debt decreases, rather than let the debt decrease, which I think we would do for our homes.
Right.
If I paid off a car, I wouldn't go and buy another car.
Right.
I'd enjoy it. Well, it still runs and it's paid off, right? We don't jump to just get more debt. We don't do that with our own finances. So as the bonds are paid off and the debt level decreases, the city is anxious to bond more so that taxpayers don't get used to a reduction in the tax rate. As the bonds were paid off, if no new building was done, the city would see a decrease in taxes because they wouldn't have to, keep raising taxes to spend all this money. So to me, it looks like the city is hunting for projects. They're hunting for the project over at the landfill. They're hunting for the school board projects.
That land was bought with a promise that they wouldn't build on it.
Well, I don't know exactly where they're going to situate this building.
Well, our land is landlocked. They don't even have an easement. We're going to come in by helicopter. We've approved it. Maybe a big slide.
Is this a school board you're talking about now?
Yeah,
Schools.
Yeah.
I
Down
see.
by Buck Meadow. We have no access to Buck Meadow. So we have to get an easement, or as some board members say, we'll just take it by eminent domain. Great. Or maybe they'll just build a big slide and the kids will slide over that property and I don't know.
Well,
but you don't do it backwards.
No.
You establish the easement and then you approve the project. We couldn't approve the project because we don't have access to the land.
Right. And it makes no sense to approve a project on land that you don't have access to. I would say it's a safe bet on any of these projects. What
But
I've
they're all
seen
going to go through.
with City is that they offer two proposals. They offer the build proposal and the renovate proposal. And inevitably, the build proposal comes in below the renovate. That's because the people who are making the proposals don't want to renovate.
Right.
So they overinflate
Yes.
the estimate on renovation and they underestimate
Yes.
the estimate for building. So what's going to happen is that I can guarantee you that $10 million public works project, if that's approved, it won't be 10. It'll be more than 10.
Right.
And the school project, if it's approved $120 million, I think the Board of Aldermen is anxious to spend that money.
Doesn't solve all our problems. We still have Brentwood. We were supposed to solve the Brentwood problem. They moved from Merrimack back to Nashua. We're renting. They were supposed to move to central office. Central office was supposed to move to Burke Street, that previous BPW project. So we still haven't resolved all of our problems, but we're spending $120 million and not addressing all of the issues.
Well,
so it's like they're not planning. They're not doing all the feasibility studies before they do. They're just running off and solving this.
I know.
Well, the beauty of that approach is, of course, once you get in there, they're going to say, well, we've already spent this much.
Right.
We're just
May as well just do the rest.
We're just going to have to do the
That's
rest
what
now.
happened because they spent $300,000 investigating this, and then they got another $1 million. We haven't, that they're spending just setting it up. We haven't dug anywhere, but they've already spent over $300,000 investigating this project. But one of the recent things that got me upset about the election, I ran on a slate of 5. We were hoping that we would restore the rule of law in our board.
Very important.
And put students first. Well, the union comes first. They are the new aristocracy. They were emailing teachers on who to vote for using district mailboxes. That violates the union contract. Now, why are we paying on a contract when they can violate it whenever they want?
Well, we certainly can't violate the
I mean,
contract.
are they expecting raises next year? I mean, what if they can violate it and we just still keep paying? So that's an unfair labor practice. They were handing out these little union-endorsed candidate political literature in the buildings. I got a report from an elementary school teacher on the handout. I got reports from the high school, 2 more teachers on the emails. They did those. So I filed an electioneering report with the city clerk, who sent it to the city attorney, who sent it to the city superintendent, who's done nothing. And I've also complained to the state.
Let's make sure
Attorney
folks
General.
don't understand what's going on here. Now, there are laws in the state
Yeah.
that prevent municipal employees, public employees from campaigning, electioneering on city
public
property.
and government
on
property.
public government property.
And it's not the time of day, that's the law, because they're saying, oh, we could do it before and after school. There's nothing in the
So
statute.
the law says on this piece of real estate, no restriction or
So what they're
permission based on time.
They're confusing the state law with the union contract that says they can have organizational meetings in the buildings before and after school and maybe sometimes on lunchtime with the permission of the principal of this school. But it explicitly excludes electioneering to the mailboxes or handing out literature.
So there's state law and there is the union contract.
Right.
The union contract is very, very important. We live by those contracts. Any kind of contract is very important, but we know that if there's any violation, if any mistake or omission or whatever that the city makes, we know we're going to hear about it from the union.
Right.
So there's selective enforcement here. So what's the recourse here? Have you reported this
Well,
to
I've
anybody?
reported to the city clerk. That went in a circular nowhere.
How about state
I
level?
did a right to know request, and I understand there's quite a few emails that they're stacking up, and I'm going to get them in 2 or 3 weeks because they can't meet the 5 business day deadline that the law requires. They got themselves an extension. And then the state, I asked the Secretary of State and the Attorney General's office.
So this is a serious matter. It's not just
it's a misdemeanor.
it's a misdemeanor. It's, not just the
it's a-
board
I
versus
mean,
the union or just a candidate versus it's state law, and you've raised this with the state attorney general.
The other thing
That's
that's
good.
very disturbing, this I realized 2 years ago, is they don't file the unions do not file the campaign expenditures reports.
Also required by law as a candidate.
No, this is ordinances. This is city ordinance. So
Okay.
the Attorney General has no jurisdiction. I spoke with them about it. There's
But
nothing
city
they can do.
ordinances do, because I had to file, you have to, as candidates, we
December
have to file
1st.
our receipts and our expenditures, where we get the money and where we're spending it, who we get the money from,
So there's
rather.
a lot of money going back and forth between the different unions and the candidates, and other there's a lot of people that are not reporting. There's only one PAC that reports, and they only gave out like $1,500. There's a lot more money going back and forth.
So the union donated to school board candidates, is that correct?
Yeah, and alderman candidates.
Yes. How many of the
Not me.
current and
Your opponents.
elected, newly elected school board members
4
have
out of
received
4
funds?
union endorsed candidates got in. Last time, 5 out of, well, they had 4 and then they're going to a special election. So they have 5 on the board now. 1 is stepping down. 4 more will join them. So it'll be 8-1.
So 8 members of the Board of Education have received campaign contributions
Right.
from the teachers union. Now, are these, when it comes time to negotiate a contract, are school board members going to be involved in the negotiation of a contract with the teachers union?
They did last time.
So someone who receives money from the union
Yes.
is able to negotiate on behalf of the city the contract with the union.
We were working for over a year on this contract, and she got us sworn in and elected, and I think she solved it in 1 or 2 meetings. Poof.
Pretty much did what they wanted.
See,
That's what I would guess.
this is the thing that, I don't think people really understand.
They don't. Yeah.
Well, she
It's the
came
fact-
back and said we worked collaboratively and we worked together and we all got along. So you need to approve it.
So what happens is the unions pick their candidates, fund them, and support them, campaign for them, get them elected. When it comes time to sit down and negotiate the contract, there are 2 people at the table: the unions and the people they helped get elected. You know who's not at the table? The taxpayer. The
taxpayer's
person
never
who
at the table.
theoretically is being represented by the board members. But you cannot tell me. I mean, come on, let's be serious here. You can't be a dispassionate person and say, I'm going to represent the taxpayers' interest when you're sitting across from the people who got you in that seat.
And they paid you to get into that seat.
Yeah, and
they
so
gave you money to get into that seat.
This is like the dirty side of politics.
The only person that recuses herself from the teacher's contract is one member who has a daughter that's in the school. She is a teacher. So she, as a family member, benefiting from it, so she recuses herself. But there are 2 retired teachers in there. I mean, they're part of the union, essentially. I mean, they don't, 5 union endorsed candidates, they didn't recuse themselves. So they feel fully enabled to vote on behalf of those who got them into office.
The same thing happens on the Board of Aldermen. A number of members of the Board of Aldermen, certainly on a regular basis, are supported by primarily the teachers union. And they take this money. And I remember being on the Board of Aldermen, I would hear one particular member who just got reelected, not a fan particularly of his political views, but he said repeatedly, sometimes we just have to make the hard choices. Well, the hard choice for him would be to say no to the guy who made that contribution, to the union member who made that contribution to him.
Right.
The easy choice for him, and that's what he really makes, is put it on the taxpayer. We'll raise taxes. He calls that the hard choice. That's not his hard choice. His hard choice would be refusing the person and the union, the group that funded his campaign. That would be the hard choice, but he doesn't do it.
Better still, he should recuse himself. Say, I have collected money from these people.
Yes.
I have a financial interest here in their...
That was brought up certainly on the Board of Aldermen. It would never happen.
We're going to discuss that on November 20th,
Good.
Wednesday, 7 o'clock. We're having a board meeting, and it's on the agenda to discuss electioneering and an unfair labor practice.
Great.
Because if they violated their contract, we need to discuss that. I'm hoping
When is that meeting again?
The 20th
Of?
of November.
Okay,
7
that's
o'clock.
public meeting.
7 o'clock at Nashua North.
We'd like to hear from you on the show after that meeting is over.
Okay,
Look forward
but
to an
we should
update.
be able to discuss that in public.
Yes, absolutely right.
It's just a matter of the contract. Article 12.3, that's
Mm-hmm.
what they violated. What are we going to do about it? We're going to say, hit me again, violate it whenever you want?
Yeah.
Or are we going to say, okay, that was wrong. We need to resolve this. This is a dispute. It's an unfair labor practice.
And rule of law is so important. We talked about that in the introduction, and you mentioned it here. Rule of law is very, very important. And we have members on the boards, these various boards, who aren't following rule of law. Rule of law is to protect the taxpayers from runaway government, really. That's
Yes.
what it does.
Yep.
So-
It establishes rules of order and all that kind of thing. But it's to protect the taxpayers from runaway government. And right now, the government, whether it's in the school board or the Board of Aldermen, is acting, I really think, for their own benefit or for the benefit of the system they're
Take an
protecting
oath of
against
office.
the school board.
They
against
take an
the
oath of
taxpayer.
office. Now they're violating state law and our union charter. Now, if those union-supported members, and we've got 5 of them, say it's okay to electioneer in our schools, breaking state law, and it's okay to break our contract, that will be outstanding. It will be unbelievable. But what they're doing is they're saying, the union leadership, you are the aristocracy. You are above the law. We follow the law. I will follow my report.
Yes.
But they're
Ends
above the
justifying
law.
the means.
So no, they are the new aristocracy. They control our city.
And we finally found some money that the Democrats and the teachers unions don't want to take from the government.
How about that? Tell us about that, Kevin.
Well, Doris, you're probably more qualified, but I'll lead into it, which was basically that in Concord, on basically a
Democrats
party
in
line
State
vote,
House.
the Democrats up in Concord have refused to accept $46 million.
$46 million.
That was we could have used to further the interests and increase the size of a number of charter schools here. to
Which is
give
public
people more-
education, by the way. It's not a private school. Charter schools are publicly funded schools. This was money that would have been dedicated to public schools, public education, and they refused it.
to give people more choice. They do not want to give people choice.
Tabled it. It's federal money. They were going to get $10 million this year, is my understanding, and it would go to charter schools, which the unions are complaining taking all their money. Well, wouldn't this take some of the pressure off? I don't know. My problem with charter schools is I wish they had elected board members, because you're using public money. I want a legitimate public voice. I think they're doing a great job, and I think we ought to allow every single building in our public school district to have some of the latitude they have. If we didn't have this top-down, we're all trying this, we had a competition where 12 elementary schools, we'd actually use phonics in one of them, because I'm understanding now that the program we're using, it does cueing, and it's not a rigorous phonics program. And our reading scores are down. So if we had different experiments in our 12 schools, we'd see what works, what doesn't. And
Well, we do
can
have different
improve.
experiments with the charter schools, and that's one of the
Yes.
reasons the charter schools were established, was to have a more mobile, easier, more adaptable kind of school environment where new things could be tested,
Yes.
and then those could be applied elsewhere.
That's
But
good. We should learn from what they're doing.
we should learn from what they're doing. And one time we were I think, hiring the new superintendent when I was on the Board of Aldermen. I asked if we're going to be looking for subject matter expertise out in the field, best practices. And the best practices here in Nashua are at the charter schools. They have the best results. And I think that they're able to take kids who are struggling elsewhere, because charter schools aren't for everybody, private schools aren't for everybody, public schools aren't for everybody. I think there's environments for each kid, and we have to offer those
Well,
alternatives
we do
so
have
that kids
problems
can
now
excel.
with special ed. The district used to give money to the charters to fund a special ed teacher. Now, because of some audit that the state did, they decided they're bringing all the kids back and forth, so they're in transit to get their public services. And they may just quit because they don't want their kid, on a bus all day.
Yeah, that's
But
not a
I
good
guess
place
the
to be.
bottom line is I want to just point out that apparently they're not pro-choice when it comes to education.
And they're not pro-education.
Right. And when they tabled that, they said no.
Yeah, they did say that.
They're not pro-choice, and they're not pro-education. Again, I think that they're probably protecting their source of campaign dollars too. The
Right, and
teachers
this
union
comes-
has a very long arm, very long reach, and they control all these folks in government. And I think it's a disservice to the folks at home.
So we're going to see how this all plays out. I must tell you, unfortunately, I'm feeling very pessimistic at this point. The thing that bothers me too is once a new level of spending is hit, it's almost impossible to roll it back.
Yes.
So I think we're going to see the effects of this election in terms of increased cost and spending and taxes. And at some point, the people are going to scream enough. I guess the question is, do you have anybody in there who's going to listen to
I
it?
hope it's not going to be too late. We have another big election, of course, next year too. All our state level offices, Senate and House, and of course the governor, and of course all the national elections.
Yep.
Folks, thank you very much for coming in. Doris and Kevin, thank you very, very much. I appreciate your insights. And thanks again for running. And again, very sorry for your losses. We'll see what happens with the city.
Yeah.
I want to thank you folks at home, too, for tuning in. My name is David Schoeneman, and you've been watching The People's View. We take a look at what's going on in local and state government and see how it affects you. We'll see you next time. Thanks.
The preceding program was provided by an independent producer solely responsible for its content. The opinions expressed do not necessarily represent the views of this station, its staff, board of directors, or underwriters.